Okay, I'm representing the group that was in this room here. We felt at a bit of disadvantage because we didn't have any ordained in the group, but we gave it our best. We kept coming back to how and where to get right knowledge was by following the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes developing right samadhi and that the jhanas and being devoid of craving will reach clarity that should reach to right knowledge. Of course, we understood we need to be an arahant to have right knowledge, which is then no more rebirth and understanding dependent origination. But we also saw that we need to start somewhere. So we start as mundane right knowledge and progress as we work from right view. This arises from, where does it actually start? We thought it can arise from different places, such as self-questioning, or it could come from a situation such as a strong seeing of death, something. Could be inspiration, could be listening to the Dhamma, coming to Dhammaloka, could come in seclusion or being with Kalyana. But we apply the reflection and we keep practicing. We just be at it, and eventually the defilements disappear and we should come to right knowledge.
Do the teachers want to say anything in response to that, or you want to wait until everyone finish? Yeah? Okay, because I thought you guys gave a clap, so must be like you want to say something. Okay, all right, Eddie?
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. The question is, how and where do we get the right knowledge? So what I got is first from teachers and monks, who are well-versed, okay, from the suttas, from the Tripitaka, three baskets, and then like inquiry and investigation, during like sessions like workshops, okay, yeah. Listen. Well, not only listening, inquiry and investigation, listen to teachings, read, hear suttas, meditation, stillness, okay, when you're still then you can see things more clearly, okay, from personal practice and realizations, okay, yeah. Association with the wise people, listening, from people doing research, okay, and also from books and YouTubes, okay. That's my summary. There's a bit more. Oh, the next, which I forgot to say. Someone was saying that the first one was from which realm, from which realm, the thing. And then the conclusion is coming from the human realm and Deva realms too. Yeah, and I was just a big question mark. Is it human and Deva realms too? Maybe, yeah, that's what they come up to. You can get knowledge from there too, I think. Does that make sense? Okay.
So we said following the right path and life experiences, followed by searching and investigating different temples and different traditions. This is before you found your path. And then inner discontent is telling you that your current knowledge isn't enough, and it's going by your instincts that tell you you found the right thing, and then you follow it when you feel you find the right thing. You tend to think that it's you, but you realize there is no I, so it's not you, it's probably your past insights that are arising and leading you to follow your discontent until you find a good path. Buddha is where you find it. Dharma is the teachings, and Sangho is the practice, and that's how you find it, one of our people said. We ran out of paper here. Great teachers, a journey is finding what's correct, and great teachers are the ones that you find from experienced teachers and feelings, leading to confidence in yourself when you realize that you found the right path, and practicing it. That's right. And sorry, I'm just struggling with the writing because it's not my writing. So practicing it and samadhi, that's right, and knowledge. Yes, thank you. An end bit. So the source is the Buddha. And when you reach stream entry, that's when your understanding becomes more developed, and you understand what, by direct knowledge, what you're hearing is correct.
I think the mic is not on. Ajahn Brahmali's mic as well.
We. Okay.
We. Okay.
Yeah.
All working
These
now.
All right. Now this one still not working.
No, his is not working.
Yeah. So I'll speak in the meantime while we're waiting for Sunyo to come online. So I thought there was most of those ideas that were spoken were, I thought, really good. Really, not maybe every single one, but many of them were really good ideas. And a lot of it has to do with kind of right view at the beginning. Kalyanamitta was mentioned. The idea of reflecting on death and reflecting on various ways. And all of these things really come down to right view, because the idea of a Kalyanamitta is to have someone who guides you in right view, and then these other reflections are actually an expression of that right view, and you put it into practice. Then you put it into practice, and then it kind of develops from there. That was kind of the main kind of theme I kind of got out of all of these things. But there's a couple of things I thought was a bit interesting here. Interesting means like, I'm not entirely sure about them. One of them was the Devaloka. So getting the teachings from the Devaloka, was that the idea? Yeah, okay. So which devas are you going to listen to? Any old deva, or just the wise devas, or how do you know which ones to listen to? The Aryan devas, okay. So yeah. Okay. So this is after you get reborn there, or while you're a human being here? After. So not next life. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, that's actually from the sutta as well. That's the yeah. According to the Sakapanya Sutta, well, that monk gets reborn in the Tavatimsa Loka, Tavatimsa heaven, or is it? And then and goes straight from there to the Sudavasa or the Brahmaloka or something. Yeah, okay, good. So that makes sense. The other thing that I thought was interesting was in your group, Sue, where they're talking about intuition and relying on intuition. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, but you have to be very careful with intuition, because sometimes intuition is right, sometimes it's completely wrong. And so you need to kind of distinguish between good intuition and bad intuition. And I think the way to do that is basically to look at your mind, and if your mind is quite pure, at peace, there isn't any strong defilements there, a sense of clarity and all of these good qualities, then the intuition is usually quite precise and accurate. But if the intuition is one that is driven by defilements, then you may have a problem. So it depends. Intuition, we all go by intuition to some extent. That's just the necessity in life. But remember the kind of the distinction between the more pure intuition and the more kind of defiled intuitions. The purer the mind, the more powerful intuition is going to be. Anyway, those are my comments. So, when was Sunyo, your turn?
Oh, I also have to comment. All right.
Don't have to.
Oh, I've got something. I heard also a lot of good answers. listening to the Dhamma, going to workshop, that's a very good answer, meeting the Aryans, word of the Buddha. But those are all good answers, but they are external things, you know. Listening to Dhamma talks, seeing Aryans, and so forth. But real right knowledge, my answer would be, was to look inside of yourself and to really go deep to the core of your being, see not what external words are about, but what your internal life is about. And this is why we go and meditate, to go inwards instead of outwards. And then after you look inwards, then all these words that we're speaking here will make a lot more sense. That's what my comment would be. All right, so that was some good answers there. Ajahn, shall we continue with the
Let us
workshop?
continue, yeah.
All right.
Let us continue. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the what is known as the I will call them the three insights, maybe threefold knowledge, if you like. Te Vidya, for those of you who prefer the Pali language, and Ajahn Brahm translates this, and I think it's very nice, as the three kind of insights. Because very often the idea of insight is used very loosely in Buddhism to mean all kinds of things. But real insight is profound insight. And the vidyas, which actually the word vidya is related to the English words wisdom, etc. So actually it is a word which has to do with something profound and deep. And so these are the real things at the very end of the Buddhist path, where you really start to understand the reality. And what is interesting about these three insights is that they don't really map entirely onto the Samma Jnana, because Samma Jnana is either arahantship or maybe it is also earlier insights of streamment. I'm not entirely sure whether it is just arahantship or maybe also includes earlier ones. It's a bit unclear, but certainly it includes arahantship. Now, these three don't really map entirely onto the ordinary way of looking at things because they concern understanding rebirth or seeing rebirth, seeing kamma, in other words, seeing the causes for rebirth, and then the final one, which is the actual awakening experience, seeing fully the Four Noble Truths and becoming an arahant from that. And so it's only the last one that matches onto Sammajnana, which is the real seeing of reality. The first two don't really match the scheme very well. It could even happen after samadhi that you see your past lives. You may not even be a stream mentor, it seems, to see these things. It seems the Buddha wasn't that, perhaps. But there are, nevertheless, there are jnanas. Jnana means knowledge in general. There may not be samma jnana, the true knowledge at the end of the path, but there are some kind of jnana, and for that reason they are helpful in the practice. In fact, it is a very, very common way, it seems, of arriving at arahantship. You see it in the suttas in so many different places. Whenever you see the gradual training, which starts off with hearing or the Buddha arising in the world, and then someone hearing those teachings, it almost always goes via these three insights, the Te Vidya. And because they are so important, I think it is worthwhile doing them here on this workshop, even though they don't map precisely into Samma Jnana. So let's have a quick look at these three knowledges, and the three insights, Te Vidya, recollection of past lives, and this is kind of a very important thing. We'll see this. Let's go through it quickly, and then we can kind of have a look in detail in a second. Then you have the understanding of kamma. You have understanding. This is like the mechanism that drives rebirth, how rebirth happens, what kind of destination you can expect, etc. And then we have the full awakening experience. Is the last one of these three. So let's check it out. So as always, it starts off with samadhi, right? When my mind has become stilled. And in this case, it specifically concerns the jhanas, because the sequence and the gradual training always goes via the jhana states. Purified, bright, flawless, rid of corruptions, pliable, workable, steady, and imperturbable. This is kind of the jhana mind, especially this refers to the fourth jhana, so this is the very, very highest state of samadhi practice. So you see the beautiful qualities here that are mentioned for this state. It's purified, right? Means that there are no defilements left in the mind. Rid of corruptions is the same thing. Flawless is similar. Bright, pabasara, means like shining. Yeah? The mind is very, very pure, yeah, at this particular state. And then come the two kind of very important qualities. It is pliable and workable. This means that the mind will do pretty much whatever you ask it to do. And this is kind of interesting, because sometimes we wonder, well, how do you recall your past lives? And actually, all you almost have to do is like tell your mind, go into the past. And the mind is like a nice dog. Yeah, when you say to the dog, sit down, it will sit. The mind, you say to the mind, look into past lives, it will look into past lives. It's pliable, workable, able to do whatever you want it to do. Steady, titta. Again, it is stable, right? It doesn't move very easily. It doesn't. It is not really affected by the world very much. Steady, imperturbable is an even more powerful word to say the same thing. Imperturbable means that the mind cannot again be moved by things. It is steady. It can stand its ground even when the insights are very profound and very challenging. The mind doesn't move. And this is a specific word used for the fourth jhana and the immaterial states. This particular word. So this is kind of, again, the power of the mind, yeah, and why Samma Samadhi and the jhanas are so powerful and so important to be able to have these kind of insights. And then, only then, yeah, comes the recollection of past lives. There's a lot of text there. I'll just read it out quickly and just comment on it very briefly here. I extended it towards the recollection of past lives. I recollected many kinds of past lives. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000 rebirths or lives. Many eons of world contracting, many eons of world expanding, many eons of the world contracting and expanding. Yeah, so you're really going for it and no holding back on the recollection of past lives. As many as you can. According to the suttas, the Buddha could remember 91 eons into the past. And what do you remember? And this is what the Buddha remembered. I remembered there I was named this. My clan was that. I looked like this. And that was my food. That was how I felt pleasure and pain. That was how my life ended. When I passed away from that place, I was reborn somewhere else. There too, I was named this. My clan was that. I looked like this. And that was my food. This was how I felt pleasure and pain. And that was how my life ended. When I passed away from that place, I was reborn here. Here means in this existence, this life. So this is the standard expression of remembering your past lives. And I think what is interesting here, there's a number of things that are very interesting with this kind of recollection. First of all, the mind, you extend it toward the recollection of past lives. This is a very simple idea. You just direct your mind and the mind just does it automatically. So if you have programmed the mind before the jhana states that you want to remember your past lives, you come out of the jhana and it's kind of what happens because you are pre-programmed and ready for that. And then you remember your past lives. And you can see here many, many, many. How many do you need to remember? Well, maybe not quite as many as this, but of course the more you see, the more obvious things start to become. What are the kind of things you remember? And some of the things that are really, I think, important here are things like you remember the pleasure and pain in these lives, yeah? Because pleasure and pain are always the driving force in existence. This is what gives life meaning or lack of meaning, depending on how much pleasure and pain you have, how it all stacks up, how it compares, yeah? And then the idea of dying, yeah, in every life. This was my end in that particular life. You always come to an end. And having that experience of dying again and again and again, yeah, going back in time. These are very, I think, powerful experiences because it teaches us about the nature of existence, because these are the driving forces in existence. So you start to understand this process, yeah, and seeing all of these things going on. And then you pass on from that state to another one, and then the same experience there, and then you go from that place to this life. It is interesting that it ends with rebirth in this particular life, the last life. And the reason I think why it does that is because it becomes very clear. The causality, the chain of cause and effect becomes very clear. Very often people have what they call these nimittas, which are like these visions of the past or visions of maybe a previous life or whatever, kind of something that's flashing up, and they think they have remembered the past. But many of these nimittas, or many of these pictures that we have in our mind, are very uncertain. We don't know why they are there. What we do know is that the mind is very powerful. It has the ability to create all kinds of pictures in the mind. Are these real images of the past, or are they creations of the mind? It's very difficult to know when there is no context. There's no context to place these pictures in. But here you have the context. What you're seeing here is a development from one life to the next one, ending in this particular life. So you can see how your mind has developed over time and changed over time, and the cause and conditions that have made you the person you are today. This is how you can be almost absolutely sure that you are absolutely sure, that's kind of the point here, that this is your past lives. You can compare this to a memory you have in this life. You know, if you remember a particular incident in your life, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, you don't have any doubt that that was you. But maybe you should have a bit of doubt, because memories are all sometimes a bit uncertain. But in this case, you have no doubt, because it's like you are reliving these experiences. You're going back there. You see yourself going through the sequence of things, ending up here. It is not like a picture. It's not like a movie. It's like a reliving of something. And that is why it is so incredibly powerful. So you see, so what is it that we actually see in this particular case? One of the things about this sort of insight is that it is more externalized than the usual insight that we have. Usual insight is about, direct connection within you between tanha and rebirth, right? Seeing how craving gives rise to rebirth in the future, understanding these kind of causal connections, or seeing dukkha within yourself, seeing the process of anapanasati, right? So it's more immediate in the here and now. But this is more like a different kind of insight. It has to do more with the going into the deep past rather than the present. So it's a bit more external to our present experience. So that's why this slightly alternative way, in a sense, of gaining insight. And this is kind of what makes this interesting. So the normal way of understanding dukkha is to look within, seeing the ceasing of things, understanding the nature of your experience right here and now. This is an alternative way of understanding dukkha. This moving on of life from one existence to another one, always carrying on, never really finding any place, just moving on randomly, one life, another life, ending up here. And this is the kind of insight into dukkha that the Buddha to-be had, that actually made him able to reach awakening here. So it is just an alternative way of understanding suffering, really. This is kind of what this is about, ultimately. But there is another second of these tevijjas. Let's go on to that one. So again, the mind is stilled in samadhi. This is always the background for real knowledge on the path, jnana dassana or sammajnana, and then comes this particular recollection. I extended it towards the knowledge of the death and rebirth of sentient beings. With clairvoyance that is purified and superhuman, I saw sentient beings passing away and being reborn, inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, in a good place or a bad place. I understood how sentient beings are reborn according to their deeds. These beings, he had something else that I took out a couple of words because I thought, anyway, that's just my evil habits. These beings did bad things by way of body, speech and mind. They spoke ill of the noble ones. They had wrong view, and they chose to act out of that wrong view. When their body breaks up after death, they are reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, in hell. These beings, however, did good things by way of body, speech and mind. They never spoke ill of the noble ones. They had a right view, and they chose to act out of that right view. When their body breaks up after death, they are reborn in a good place, in a heavenly realm. So this is obviously the idea of kamma, doing bad or doing good. Interesting how it has the speaking ill of the noble ones is very fascinating, isn't it? I mean, this is right there in terms of, must be very serious when it's kind of mentioned in this way. But the general idea here is that your rebirth depends on your karma, your actions, how you live your life. That's kind of the basic idea here. And why is this so important? Why does this matter? Because it shows the mechanism of rebirth. And perhaps you think, well, this means that we have some control over our rebirth. But of course, the point is, when you have seen many, many past lives, and you have seen how karma works on those past lives, what you are seeing is you are seeing the lack of control that you have over your karma. You're seeing how random it is, how you are influenced in certain ways, that there is no, essentially you're seeing a little bit of non-self. You're just seeing the influence on the world acting on you, and then you're making karma because of all of these external influences. There is no sense of direction. It's not as if you are in charge, making good karma, bad karma. No, it's all these cause and connections coming together, and then you make bad karma or good karma depending on what those cause and conditions are. And that is incredibly scary. Yeah, it's really, really scary, because if you are not in charge of your karma, if external influences are responsible for how you start to act, your choices are determined by external things, that's kind of worrying, isn't it? Because it means that you have no idea what's going to happen next. In this life, you may be a good Buddhist practicing the right way, not because you want to be, but because you are conditioned in this way, right? It feels like we are choosing it, but of course that's just another illusion. So the karma and rebirth are this impersonal cause and effect process that just happens to us, and then we get reborn accordingly, sometimes in bad places, sometimes in good places. That whole picture becomes after a while very kind of worrisome and very problematic, and no wonder this becomes a very powerful foundation for wanting to end rebirth, if it is so random, if it is so uncertain what is going to happen next. So this is kind of the idea behind this. It is not just a little bit concerning, it is very, very concerning. I think if you see these kind of things directly, you're going to have a very powerful motivation and impetus to get out of samsaric existence. This is the idea behind this idea of roaming about, without purpose, without direction, not having just roaming randomly through the streets, or through samsara. And this is kind of the background for this. Then we come to the third of the te vijja. Again, jhanas, and after jhanas, ding. I extended it towards the knowledge of the ending of the defilements. This is asavakaya jnana. Asavakaya, the ending of defilements, jnana again. I truly understood. This is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is cessation of suffering, this is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. Four Noble Truths. But because it is the asavakaya, you also have a further knowledge. I truly understood. These are the defilements. These are the asavas. This is the origin of the defilement. This is the asava samudaya. This is the cessation of defilements, the asava nirodha, and the practice that leads to the cessation of defilements. And at this point, you become an arahant. So the origin of the defilements, what is that? That is avidya, that is ignorance itself. And only with the cessation of ignorance do these asavas also cease. These are these deepest, most deep-rooted defilements in the human mind that drive existence in whatever way. And this is then the final insight and knowledge that we get based on being turned off by the nature of rebirth and the whole problem before it. And this last one, this is the real samma jnana, if you like, on the path, where you fully understand the nature of existence itself. So I've already spoken about this at length before, the Four Noble Truths, so I'll leave it at that. All right, that is all I think I want to say about the te vijja. Let us do a couple of minutes of meditation, and then we can do some questions. everyone. So let us carry on. Carry on. So, any questions, please? Yeah. Okay, Venerable Vimutti over here.
Sorry, I have more than one, but it's a rare opportunity, so that's my excuse. I just asked the slightly unrelated one first. You said something about programming the mind to remember past lives. When did you? How does one do that? Like, and when and why not?
I think, what you end up doing on the path, everything is really programmed in a way. We're being programmed by the Buddha all the time. And so whatever you do is programming. And what you do on the path, whether you are the person who goes for all the immaterial attainments and all of these kind of things, will depend on the inclination of the mind, yeah. And that inclination comes from programming, yeah. And so if you want to remember your past lives, well, then you have to somehow incline the mind that way, and that happens through programming. And usually you have to do it before the jhanas, because after the jhana, your mind is kind of, it's kind of just chilling out. You're having a good time. So you program it beforehand by reading the suttas, by thinking that this is really worthwhile doing, yeah. And then when you come out, it will happen, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The other thing was, you mentioned that the Tevijja don't quite map onto the proper Samajnana stuff. And yet, you yourself said, Ajahn, that seeing beings being reborn was that way of seeing how karma unfolded was, part of seeing suffering and that sense of lack of control and anatta. And also, it's also about seeing aspects of craving and dependent origination. And maybe it's not the full thing that comes with the third knowledge, but it's still part of that.
Absolutely, yeah. No, indeed, and that's kind of why it is so powerful, yeah, because it gives a lot of information in that area. Not the full and complete information, but very close, and that's kind of why it is so powerful, yeah. So absolutely, yeah.
Okay. The other thing was, I think in the previous quote from the same sutta, yes, these beings did bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. I thought it was interesting that it says these beings did things by way of mind, and I heard somewhere that to see other beings passing away and reappearing, you have to have known those beings yourself, and somehow there has to be some crossover, like within your life as well, or whether it's something totally external to you, or nothing to do with your past lives at all, or
yeah.
Do you know anything about that, Ajahn?
Not entirely sure. Yeah, I think it may be possible to also read people's minds straight away. Yeah, from kind of directly as they, maybe even watch them as they die and see what happens. May also be possible. Okay. Maybe different ways of doing this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe because what I was remembering was I read that book Awake, and there was one. Not Awake. Sorry, I always say that. After. Bruce
okay.
Grayson.
Yeah.
And there was one story where it was the guy that got trapped under a truck or something, and he had a near-death experience, and he remembered when he was 8 years old and he was really mean to his auntie. But the interesting thing that I've never heard before was that it was like he was his auntie.
Right, yeah.
And he could see how she was feeling and what she was thinking and her whole thought processes and everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, as an aside, the really cool thing about that was that because he was able to understand the whole situation from his point of view and her point of view, there was also this sense of forgiveness, which I thought was actually the coolest part of that story. But in this, coming back to what we're talking about, that might be one way, like someone that you know and was part of your life, and somehow you're able to connect to that point where you can sense what was going on for them?
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard to know in that situation whether he was just imagining himself to be the auntie or whether he actually was the auntie, and that's kind of really difficult to know. But I think the point is that you see yourself in a third-person perspective, and you're taking the perspective of other people, and whether that's really them or not doesn't really matter so much. And that's kind of scary, because it means that all your secret, dodgy things, you start judging yourself for those things, and you start to see them as if you are a third person. And that's why you can't really get away with anything. That's kind of the point. So you have to really do things in the right way. When you come to your deathbed, all of these things, you're going to judge yourself for them.
It is very scary. You may as well get into the habit of understanding how to forgive.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
She has asked your questions. No, I'm just kidding.
Only so many questions per family, right?
I was going to put up my hand, but yellow robes always get the first choice.
Right, of course. Of course, yeah.
But the last sutta that you did at the retreat, Ajahn, just when you were showing the three Nagara Sutta, that SN 1265, I remember the number from your retreat.
Yeah.
And in that, actually, your theme was how to think like a Buddha of the retreat.
To
be the Buddha, to be the Buddha just before awakening.
Yeah.
And in there, Buddha says that before my awakening, I looked at the dependent origination. But of course, there he finished at the consciousness, didn't he? He didn't go to Sankara and the Avijja there. Those two steps were missing, but that's beside the point. I was going to ask that as well. But this asavakya jnana, the ending of defilements, would you say that he would have come to the conclusion of the asavakya after reviewing the full 12 cognates or the factors of the Paticcasamuppada? Though it is not mentioned as part of the Vijjajan, because Paticcasamuppada completely describes the suffering. It's the right from the in detail.
Yeah.
So would you say that before his awakening he looked at in that summary, and then that gave him the sort of the idea, speculating actually?
I would say that he probably had the asavakya jnana first. Because the insight you need for awakening is you do understand dependent origination, but you may not have worked out all the factors yet. Yeah, because I mean, this is one thing is how the insight is one thing. How you present it in 10 or 12 factors is something else. And so he would have seen the conditionality of rebirth on craving. That craving is required for rebirth, and I would have seen that. But to actually work it out into a nice sequence, that would have taken a little bit of mental effort. So I would say, first of all, you have the insight, which is asavakya jnana, and then afterwards, probably afterwards, comes the actual working out of the details, I would say. I would think that's the way it seems natural to me. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to add anything about Sunyo?
Well, in the next thing, it says, I truly understood the origins of suffering first, before he saw the ending of the defilements.
Yeah, so would be tanha causing suffering, yeah.
But that is sort of an expansion of that idea, yeah.
Please, yeah.
This is from the morning, actually, session. I didn't get the chance to ask. Two things I had. One, Ajahn Brahm used to teach the Four Noble Truths, the other way around.
Yeah.
This is happiness. And then starting from there, maybe that way you don't start from suffering. Yeah, I suppose it is more digestible for some. That is one comment I want to make. At the time you were talking, we were going round and round about suffering. Then about cravings, wholesome craving. Is there such a thing, Ajahn? Wholesome craving, craving for wholesome life. I mean, like what you all are doing and teaching, and it's something that is getting everybody, I mean, all of us out of the suffering. And is that also a craving and leading to rebirth, to teach again, that sort of thing? Is it right?
Do you want to say something?
Well,
Or you-
it depends on how you look at it, I suppose. But in the suttas, the term craving seems to always have a negative connotation. So craving is always negative. But there are other terms like desire, for example, which are used also in a more positive sense.
Yeah.
So you can have like a desire to reach the end of suffering. And there's even suttas that talk about that says, oh, you're trying to end desire, but don't you need desire for that? Then Ananda says, yeah, imagine you want to go to a lovely park. And first you desire to go to the park, but once you're there, you don't desire to be there anymore. So what he's saying is, yeah, you may have some desire along the path to become enlightened or to reach the end of suffering, but at the end you'll get rid of all desires. So there's some wholesome desires as well.
In fact, you need that desire.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Or the desire to overcome unwholesome states is another one. In right effort, that is explained that way. The desire to overcome the unwholesome, the desire to reach the wholesome. But it's never called craving.
Yeah,
in
desire
the suttas
to help
anyway.
and all that. Desire to help others.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. If you don't mind, we will.
Thank you, Ajahn.
We will move on now.
I thought you were going to move on, or no?
Yeah, preferably we will move on.
Can I
Yeah.
ask
We will
another
be here for a long time if we keep going with questions. We'll do another round later, or okay, just because you're ordained, you get priority.
Especially
No,
for-
I heard what Prem said just now about happiness, but I thought the cessation of suffering is not happiness. I don't know. I may be wrong. I thought I thought the cessation of suffering is beyond happiness and suffering, because even suffering and happiness, they are like the two sides of a coin. So if you have suffering, you will have happiness. If you have happiness, you would have suffering. I thought the cessation of suffering is beyond. So I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's just a matter of words, really. There's also some suttas where it talks about what is so happy about it when you don't experience anything. And then the answer is, well, that is exactly what is so happy about it, or pleasant about it, that you don't experience anything. So it's kind of, it's sukha to go beyond sukha, basically. It's pleasant to go beyond pleasure. So it's both true in a way. Yeah. Does that make sense to people? It's a little bit of how you use the words. Sometimes you have to make the end of suffering into a kind of happiness to attract people. Like the end of suffering is happy, is nice, it's pleasant. But in a way it's also beyond happiness as well. Yeah? Okay. I know many of you have other questions, but maybe they'll be answered as we go through the rest of the workshop. Often that's the case, actually. So, Ajahn Brahmali just talked about these te vijas, really deep insights that the Buddha had, and it seems like many of the other enlightened beings also had. Sometimes a bit hard to relate to, though, those te vijas, especially the one about seeing other beings being reborn. I mean, if I would ask you here, please don't do it, but if I would ask you here, put your hand up if you have any past life memories, then I think a few hands might go up if you have any knowledge of past lives. If I would ask you, have you ever seen other beings being reborn according to their karma, then I suspect very few hands, if any, will come up. So these ideas are very hard to relate to. But we decided to include them because they are so often mentioned in the suttas, and we are basically giving sutta classes here. Now, we come down to something which is more relatable though, which is the six senses. Because I could also ask, and now please do it, put your hand up if you have the six senses. Okay. Well, most everybody has their hand up, and those who don't are probably don't have any senses at all at this moment. Yeah, we all have the six senses, so this is very pragmatic teachings about the six senses. It comes down to our experience. Now, and since you've put your hand up, when I ask you, do you have the six senses? Then I suppose that you know what these six senses are. So, this is another pop quiz. What are the six senses? Please don't be shy, just shout up. Eyes. Eyes, yes, I hear eyes, hearing. What else? Nose. Yes. Body. And the last one? Mind. Right. So the six senses. The seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, all the bodily touching stuff, and the mind. I could not find a good picture for the mind, because the mind is not material, but I thought this one was kind of funny. So those are the six senses, right? Now, what did the Buddha have to say about these six senses? That is what I will talk about today. But he had a lot to say about the six senses, so I have to be picky and only pick a few suttas that I like. So, it comes down back to what we talked about at the start of the workshop, the truth of suffering. And what is the truth seen by the Noble One of suffering? How do you think this quote continues? Yes, exactly. So the Buddha defined this truth in different ways. You know, the most famous one is birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, etc. The one we've seen before. But here's an alternative version, actually. And then the Buddha says, what is the truth seen by the Noble One of suffering? The six senses you should answer. What six? And I translated the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, sense of smell, sense of taste, sense of touch, and the mind. Pali is Chakusota, Ghana, Jiva, Kaya, and Mano. So those are the six senses, and the Buddha says those are suffering. Yeah. Kind of challenging. I asked you at the start of the workshop, are you sure you're ready? Well, you're still all here, but all these six senses, Buddha says, are within suffering. Now you might know these senses, and I heard some of you already saying it when I asked you what are the six senses, as the eye, the ear, the nose, etc. I find that a little bit strange sounding, like the eye is suffering, for example. Sense of sight, that is what it is about. It is the faculty of seeing. Just the eyeball itself is not suffering. You know, that's just a thing. The nose is just a thing. If I take my nose off and put it here on the table, it's not suffering. It's the smelling that is the suffering. So the sense of smell, that is suffering. And just for those of you who are into this kind of translation stuff, so why did I not translate it as the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and so forth? And this is translated of Sanskrit text, but the same principle applies to a large extent to Pali as well. In dealing with sight and hearing, and to some extent also in the case of the other faculties, the other senses, the Upanishads, these are Sanskrit texts, distinguish the power of seeing and hearing from the respective external organs, the eye and the ear. So they separate like the faculty of sight from just the eye itself. The eye is a thing, a physical thing, and the sense of sight is more like the way you experience sights. And they consistently use different Sanskrit texts for the two, Chakshus and Shotra for sight and hearing, and Akshan and Karna for the eye and ear. Now, and I think that in the Pali it's to a large extent the same thing. Yeah? Buddha also talks about the eye is For example, in some translation, the eye is suffering. The ear is suffering. But what is a little bit strange about that, to me, is that we have 2 eyes and 2 ears. Yeah, but we only have one faculty of sight and one faculty of hearing. That's why I translated the sense of sight and the sense of hearing. Just so you know, yeah? Instead of the eye and the ear. But it means the same thing. When you read other translators, they talk about the eye and the ear. That okay? Are you happy to use the sense of sight and the sense of hearing as well? So to me, it makes it a bit more relatable from the internal perspective. So that's what I will use. Okay, many of you seem to be happy with that. That's good. Now, these 6 senses, they also are aware of things. And what are they aware of? The sense of sight is, of course, I won't make this into another pop quiz. A sense of sight is aware of things that you see. You could say sights. And the sense of hearing is aware of things that you hear. So sounds and so forth. And the Buddha talked about these as well. Now here's another sutta. And the Buddha says, and what is everything? Or what is all? Sabbang. It is just the sense of sight and sights. So the sense of sight and the things you see, the sights. The sense of hearing and sounds. The sense of smell and smells. The sense of taste and flavors. The sense of touch and tangibles, like all kind of things that you feel with your body, like touching or just pains and that kind of stuff. The mind and mental phenomena. So these are, the Buddha says, is everything. That is what is meant by everything. If somebody would say, they reject this as the all there, I should say, as everything, and define everything as something else, their words would just be groundless. So, the Buddha is basically saying here, have you ever experienced something that is not sights, sounds, smells, flavors, tangibles, or mental phenomena? If you say, yes, I have experienced another sense or another consciousness, then the Buddha says your words would just be groundless, because those things don't exist. This is what life is about. 6 senses. Sight, sound, smells, flavors, tangibles. Yeah, they all come and go. And then there's the mind and all that stuff that it conjures up. Also comes and goes all the time. That is what constitutes life. That's what all there is, what the Buddha is saying here. A lot of stuff can go on in these 6 senses, yeah? I can see you all here in the hall, you hear my voice, you're thinking about these teachings, and so forth. But it's all just the 6 senses, nothing more. That's what the Buddha is saying. That is already a very challenging idea, in a way, because if this is all there is, and it's all changing all the time, then why do we keep holding on to this? Now, what the Buddha also said about everything, about the all, sabbang, is a very powerful statement, and that is, sabbang aditang, everything burns, or the all burns. It all burns. Is anybody familiar with this statement? Yeah, Ryan, what sutta is it from? Huh? It's the Adita Sutta, yes, Adita Sutta. The burning sutta. The tradition is said to be the 3rd discourse of the Buddha on the 6 senses and them being burning. This is a really, really powerful statement, to me anyway. Everything burns, and we'll see in a moment what that means. But maybe just a little personal anecdote. Last week when I read out a quote by Ajahn, I got a little bit emotional because it really spoke to me very deeply, and it's taught me some things about really deep truths. And I don't mind getting emotional about these kind of things. Ajahn Chah once said, If you haven't cried deeply a number of times, you haven't really started practicing yet. Yeah, when these ideas are just theories to you, and you haven't really started practicing. And now, one time, which was a range retreat a couple years ago in Bodhinyana, and in the range retreat we chant this sutta as well. And this is the first line that the Buddha says in the sutta, Sabbang bhikkhave aditang. And we started chanting, and I chanted as well, Sabbang aditang. And that was the only words that I could chant, because the rest of this whole discourse I was crying, because it felt so true to me. Everything is on fire, everything is burning. And I was like, oh, I should get out of this nonsense. Why am I here? And that is really like letting go when you experience it like that. So these suttas sound theoretical to you maybe, but one day they really become alive and you really feel what the Buddha is talking about when he says everything burns. I hope so anyway, that you'll experience that one day. Now what does he mean by that? Mendicants, everything burns. So now I'm reading out the sutta itself. Everything burns. And what is everything that burns? Well, we know that already. But it goes into a little bit more detail. The sense of sight burns. Sights burn, the things you see. Sight consciousness burns. Sense impressions or contact of sight burns. Any sensation or feeling, Vedana, coming from sense impressions of sight, whether pleasant, painful or neutral, also burns. For example, when you said earlier, like happiness is also suffering, yeah, here, pleasant is sukha, is also burns. It's same for the sense of hearing and sounds, the sense of smell and smells, the sense of taste and flavors, the sense of touch and tangibles, the mind as well, and mental phenomena, they burn. Now, I cut out a little bit of the sutta to not make it too repetitive, but they burn with what? This is actually repeated after every of the 6 senses, but just to summarize. They burn basically with 2 main fires, you could say. Fire A and fire B. The Buddha says, they burn with what? They burn with the fire of desire, the fire of anger, and the fire of delusion. This is the defilements of the mind. This is when you are unenlightened, always crave all these things, and you get angry because of these things, and your mind is deluded. This is the fires that burn inside of you. But they also burn with fire B. They burn with birth, old age and death, and sorrow, grief, pain, the word is dukkha, sadness and distress, I tell you. So, first, before the break, I was speaking about these 2 knowledges of the enlightened beings, fully enlightened beings. The first knowledge that they have ended craving, and the second knowledge that they ended rebirth as well. They might have some other knowledges as well, of course, about anatta and anicca and so forth. But here again, we find these same 2 things. The defilements and the suffering that springs from the defilements. So first of all, these 6 senses, they burn with the defilements because you desire them and so forth. But they also intrinsically burn with suffering themselves, especially the suffering of rebirth. Yeah? So 2 kind of fires they burn with. Now, and this is when you might start also crying during the chanting. Mendicants, as a learned noble disciple, when you see this, you get disillusioned with all these things. It lists them all out again. But it's just all those things before, like the sight consciousness, and so forth for all the 6 senses. Being disillusioned, you lose desire. By losing desire, the mind gets liberated. When it is liberated, you will know it. You will understand that the holy life is finished, the work is done, that rebirth has ended, so there won't be another life. So this is again the double knowledge. You know that the work is done, the defilements are gone, so you don't have to do anything anymore. Now you just have to wait basically until suffering ends. Then there is no more rebirth and no more next life. So these 6 senses, deep insight into them, first happens as a stream winner, when you see all this, that these things are suffering and that they are impermanent, but also that they are everything, right? There is nothing beyond the 6 senses. Nothing to be experienced beyond the 6 senses, maybe the better way to put it. When you see that, then you get disillusion, because you know, why am I craving all these things? And why should I perpetuate these things? And then you start losing desire. When you've fully lost all desire, then the mind gets liberated from the defilements. So then fire A has stopped burning when you're enlightened. However, enlightened beings still have to die, so they still have old age and death. They may not have sorrow and grief, but they still have pain. So they're still not fully free from suffering, and we'll talk about that next week as well. So they still, fire B is still burning until they pass away. And this comes also, the 2 type of nibbana come into the picture here, which we'll also talk about later. Basically the nibbana of the defilements, the extinguishment of fire A, and the nibbana of suffering, the extinguishment of fire B, are 2 separate points in time, actually. What do you think, Venerable? Good sutta? Yeah, I think so too. It's one of my favorites, actually. Yeah. I've always related to the 6 senses a little bit more easily than to the 5 aggregates, in a sense. The 5 aggregates also very, very helpful. But the 6 senses, I don't know, it seems, to me it was always a bit more easy way to subdivide experience. So this is why I also like to talk about this topic as well. So the Buddha taught in all these different ways, and different things will be useful to different people. And maybe the 6 senses relate more easily, you relate more easily to the 6 senses, or maybe you relate more easily to the 5 aggregates or something else. So, yeah. And of course, after this discourse, some of you might know, it's said that 1,000 of the attending people, mendicants, became enlightened. There's never so many anywhere else in the whole Pali Canon. Maybe 1,000 is a little bit of an exaggeration. It seems like a very beautifully rounded number anyway, but basically that's a statement of, remember this sutta, it's very powerful. That's how I take that to be anyway. Anyway, so these 6 senses that you said you all have, they are all burning, all on fire. Yeah, with desires, with anger, hatred, but also with suffering. That's what the Buddha talked about in that sutta. Very deep ideas and very difficult to see. And the way to see that the 5 senses are suffering, we've talked about that before, but I want to repeat this because it makes it a little bit more relatable maybe, is to move away from those 5 senses. When you move away from the 5 senses, and already before the jhanas, you start to move away from the 5 senses when you experience like what we call nimittas. But really, when you go into the jhanas themselves, then you're really, really away from the 5 senses. Then after you come out, you start to realize, oh, all that stuff, all that seeing and that hearing, that was actually burning. That's really, yeah, as I said before, not nice. It's problematic. And then you still also have to see that the mind is burning as well. And how would you do that? Well, that is even more deep. And I got another sutta for that. I feel I'm going really fast through some very deep ideas. These kind of ideas take a lot of time to integrate, and these are the kind of suttas you might want to read again and again. But I'll just give you some pointers now. And maybe I'm hoping that somebody during this workshop suddenly is like, oh yeah, they are suffering, and they really understand it. Maybe that's what I'm waiting for, because you're all sort of sitting here like, okay, they're burning. But if you sit like that, okay, they're burning, then you still have a little bit more to realize, which is fine. We all have to learn as we go. Here is another way to think about the six senses. If somebody said the sense of sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch is oneself, then that is not tenable. You can't say that, basically. Why? The arising and vanishing of these senses is seen, and the arising or vanishing basically means the impermanence is seen. And from that it follows that one's sense of self, that one's self would arise and vanish. So it's not tenable to say that the senses are oneself. And so the senses are without a self. Without a self, anatta, is how I translate anatta. They don't have a self. And a self, sort of almost by definition, has to be something that exists from one moment to the next and sort of continues throughout your life. Because that is who you really are. Yeah? Like if I say Thomas, you think it refers to some certain being inside of you that existed at birth and will at least exist until you die. That is like the sense of self. The Buddha says, you cannot say that there is a self inside of these senses or related to these six senses or that has these senses, because the arising and vanishing of these is seen. Now, you might relate to that in different ways, but what I take that to mean is what I talked about just a moment ago, when these senses disappear. And especially powerful when they disappear in the jhanas, and you come out and you realize, oh, these five senses were completely gone. So you cannot have a sense of self really to those senses anymore. You might still have, because the sense of self comes back, but if you really reflect upon it, then you would have to admit to yourself that it makes no sense that you had a sense of self with respect to the five senses, because they are just impermanent. They come and go on their own accord, basically. Yeah? Now, goes much deeper north still. If somebody said, the mind is oneself, then that is also not tenable. You're also not valid to say that. The arising and vanishing of the mind is seen, and from that it follows that oneself would arise and vanish. So it's not tenable to say that the mind is oneself, and so the mind is without a self. The mind is anatta. First of all, you see here the connection between anicca and anatta, right? All these three characteristics. Before there was a question about why does the Buddha talk about suffering in the First Noble Truth and not anicca or anatta? Well, there's reasons for that that you pointed out yourself actually, but it's also the case that these three teachings of the three characteristics are inherently connected. Yeah? Something is suffering is connected to it not being a self, and impermanence as well. I hope to speak a little bit more about this at the end, if we have time, but here we see a connection between impermanence, or anicca, and anatta, something that is not permanent, something that arises and vanishes like that. You cannot take that to be valid as a self. Does that make some sense, at least intellectually? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. Some hesitant nods, that's good enough. I'm happy with that. Yeah? A self, who you really are, let me put it more differently so I get some more maybe deeper nods. The self is who you think you are, and if there was somebody that you really are, like a core inside of your being, who you are, then that would have to stay consistent, or that would have to at least not suddenly disappear. But the Buddha is saying, these senses, they all disappear, and you can see that, and therefore you cannot have a sense of self with regard to these things. Now, the arising and vanishing of the mind is seen. I take that to refer in particular to inside of the stream enterer. When you go into a jhana, then the 5 senses cease, but the stream enterer or the stream winner has also seen the mind cease as well. They've let go not only of the 5 senses when they go into jhana, but also let go of the mind as well. And then the mind ceases for a little bit, they come back, they're aware again afterwards. And then they would really have to realize, oh yeah, when all these 6 senses ceased, there was nothing experienced anymore. Nothing was there anymore. So therefore they cannot have a sense of self anymore with respect to all of these things. And that's how their sense of self starts falling apart. Their Sakkaya Ditthi ends because they've seen impermanence in these things. And that is basically all I have to say about the 6 senses. So they are burning, and they're also impermanent and without a self as well. Yeah, and once more, it's a beautiful way to divide up experience, or existence, you could say. Especially when you have these deeper experiences of jhanas, then you can just see, okay, 5 senses is one thing, and then there's the 6th sense, the mind. What about that? After you come out of jhana, if you ever do, then reflect upon that thing that I saw, the mind from inside. Is that permanent? Or is that also dependently arisen just as much as the other senses? And if you can see that it is just as unreliable as the other senses, then you will start to get some really deep insights into the Buddha's teachings. So, yeah. That's all I have to say about that. Maybe we do some questions, or I think just some questions should be good enough.
Do you want to do the 5 minutes meditation first before you ask the question?
Yeah, we can do as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's continue. Any questions, please?
It's already 1:54, so maybe we just take 2 questions.
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Because we also have 2 more topics, hopefully. Maybe just one will see.
Just one?
No, 2 questions.
2? Right.
There's 2 confusing things. The first thing is like the self disappearing, this last part here where you say the mind disappears and it appears and disappears, so you go to sleep and you wake up, that kind of thing, or you get knocked out. So therefore the self doesn't exist. But that's a bit strange because the sun will go down and it disappears and the sun comes up. And you would not say that the sun doesn't exist. So don't answer that question. The second question is the one I was more confused about, and that is the karma, the vidya. And it seems to me that the karma is arising from past actions of the non-selves that you used to be. And these actions from these past incarnations of whatever you were affect who you are. But then it doesn't agree with what you said, that everything is so uncertain and we can't be certain of this and certain of that. Did you mean to say that you can't be completely certain? You seem to imply that things are so random and it's very scary and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, what I meant is that the making of karma itself is random. Yeah, it's actually the making of karma which is so uncertain. So your future is determined by your karma, just like our present is determined by past karma. In the same way, our future is determined by how we live our lives, by our karma. But actually, what karma you're going to make is just very, very uncertain. We think the problem is that we tend to think that we are in charge of our lives. So if I make a decision to make good karma, I will create a good future for myself. But actually, what you see is that your choices and what karma you make, actually, those choices themselves are influenced by all of these conditions in the past. So where instead of actually being in charge of where you're going in the future, you are a product of the conditioning even in the future. Yeah?
I mean, I agree with that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
It's just that surely you have some say in the matter. It's not completely random. It's not completely scary. I can put my socks on and have warm feet. And then that's pretty clear that I have some control there.
Well, I mean, you're just following your desires. You're just following, obvious thing to do in that case. Yeah, and your conditioning tells you to put socks on, so you do that. But whether you make good karma or bad karma for the future, that is equally subject to the conditioning. Conditioning of the cold makes you put the socks on. It's not really a sense of self that decides. You wouldn't decide otherwise. You fall in with the wrong crowd or whatever. You're going to end up doing kind of the wrong things. It feels like you are making these choices. But actually, it is just like with putting the socks on your feet. Actually, the choices are already made for you, and then on top of that comes the sensation that you are making this choice independently. But actually, it's just a natural cause and effect process.
So just the physics cause and effect process.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I used up the time.
Yeah.
Quick one, Eddie.
So, Ajahn Sunyo, and Ajahn Brahmali, you're saying that the 6 senses are burning?
Not me, it's the Buddha.
Oh, but Buddha, yeah. Okay, fair enough, yeah. Okay, this question of mine's got 2 sections, okay? Yeah. When you talk about 6 senses are burning, I was referring to the 12 links, earlier when you mentioned about 12, the law of dependent origination, okay? So I see the law of dependent origin as broken into 3 life. First 2 is previous life, 3 to 10 is this life, the last 2 is previous life. Now the 6 sense doors, okay? From my understanding, is problem enters us through our 6 sense doors, and then if you keep going on, this thing leads to burning. Yeah, but this 6 sense, what means the 12 link can be reversed in it.
Reversed?
Can be reversed.
No, not
Like,
really reversed, but you can make
like
them
these
cease.
conditions that this ceases, that ceases.
Yeah, okay,
you can.
yes.
Buddha told it can be reversed.
Yeah, okay. Yes, in that sense that they can be made to cease. Yes.
Yeah, and the first one. Okay, the second question is the thing. You see, desire is so strong in us, you know. No. I mean, desire, craving is the what I call the more intense part of desire. Okay, even desire, craving is the intense part. No, desire brings suffering. We know that. Okay, but desire is so strong in us, you know. So what you're talking here, this thing is the extreme end. You know, we know it's burning, but as a human being, we still have desire.
Yeah, but
so it's a question of slowly come back to the old, slowly have to cut out the things. And we know it's burning. Unless we have a problem, like people have cancer, then they have to, they've gone to the what I call extremity. Then they think of like how to reverse, you know. You understand this thing, you know? To change lifestyle, change all this, cut down on the six senses, see which one is wrong, you know. Other than that, we still, as a human being, we just can't cut out the sense, you know. We know it's burning.
Yeah, well...
Did you see what I mean?
I think so. You're saying it's sort of obvious that things are burning sometimes, like when you get cancer or something. But the Buddha is here talking also about a deeper idea. That is not just burning in a very clear way, but also in very subtle ways. And that comes back to a question asked before the break about how to translate suffering as dukkha or unsatisfying. It really is dukkha, it really is burning, but it's really difficult to see for people. So you see it to a certain extent, but there are still small fires that you might not yet see. Yes.
You would see it more if you have the problem like a serious disease or what, you know. Okay, life-threatening, then you take steps to, if you are sort of, you have a bit of like a little bit of knowledge, or you know, or you can sort of, beware of the six sense doors. You say, that brings suffering, you know. Do you see what I mean? Because the problem enters from our sixth sense.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Eddie. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you want to continue or you want to take the question?
Yeah.
Eddie, we tried to say that, we know we have six senses, and we know that the house is burning or the forest is burning, but there's a certain level of, on one hand, we say it's unpredictable, it's quite chaotic, but I guess we'd like to think that there's a level of ability to moderate that, to throw kindling on as opposed to great logs. I guess that's where the term self-regulation comes from.
Let me just make.
I think that's it.
Let me just make one final comment on that. No, Eddie, I'll make a final comment because Ajahn Brahmali has some interesting things to say as well. So here it says, any sensation coming from sight or the other senses is burning, whether pleasant, painful, or neutral. And sometimes we see it's obvious the painful feelings are burning, but the Buddha is also saying that pleasant feelings are also burning. So sometimes some of the burning is obvious, but not all of the burning. I think you had a good point, Eddie. Yeah. Okay. Ajahn.
All right. Okay. So we're going to look at what looks like the last topic for today, because this time is, as always, running out. So we're going to now look at the 5 aggregates, the Pancha Khanda. And as always, kind of the term aggregate is a bit, it's a bit sort of nondescript, and really what it refers to is different aspects. I wouldn't say of existence, I would say of experience, because to me existence is a bit when people talk about existence, so many things can be said to exist, but it means about personal existence, the existence of a person, so which is really the same as experience. A person is just experience. So the 5 aspects of experience is how I would translate this. And the reason why the Buddha talks about these things, here is my translation of 4 grasped aspects of experience, Panch Upadana Khandha. And the reason why the Buddha talks about these things, very similar to the 6 senses, is because this is where you tend to see a self. This is where kind of the delusion tends to hide out. So by contemplating these 5 aspects of experience in the right way, you can actually uncover the delusion and you can see things clearly. And so our experience is divided up into 5 areas, and these are the 5 areas which it is divided up. The form as a grasp aspect of experience, form meaning here like the physical aspect of things. It also means the sight, but that's really covered by the 6 senses. The more the physical aspect of things, the feeling of the body and these kind of things, feeling of pressures and however we experience the world through touch very often is the form part of things, and a very important part because we tend to take the body and the senses as a self, and the body and the senses are included here in this idea of rupa, of form. Then we have the feeling or sensation, which I think is also a nice translation for this, as a grasp aspect of experience. And this is a very important part of experience, and it's a very easy gateway to understand, again, insight, because feelings or sensations in terms of things being pleasurable, displeasurable, or neutral, this is really what life is all about. This is the fuel for craving, the fuel for desires, the fuel for doing anything, for the will and all of these kind of things. This is what motivates us in life to do anything at all. This is why we are here at Amaloka, to listen to these things. This is why we become monastics. This is why we become lay Buddhists. This is why we do anything really in life, driven by feeling. So if you can understand feelings properly, that is really sufficient to understand the entirety of existence, the entirety of what it is to be a human being. And that's why you will see in the suttas it is not so uncommon that the contemplation of feeling is used as the foundation for arahantship. When the Sariputta very famously contemplated feeling, and that gave rise to his arahantship in the Dighanaka Sutta. Mr. Longnail. Dighanaka means long nail, and he was a cousin apparently of Sariputta, so his name was Mr. Longnail, and he came to speak to the Buddha when Sariputta was listening, became an arahant at that time. It's a very important part of the 5 khandhas. Then we have the perceptions as a grasp aspect of experience. This is the Sunyo Upadana Khandha. And perception is how we make sense of the world, how we classify things, how we see things, how we, how we divide things out, how sounds make sense to us, how sights make sense to us, etc., etc. This is how we enables us to relate to the world. So obviously a very important part of experience as well. Then we have the will as a grasp aspect of experience. And the will is really just any kind of doing that we do, any kind of intention, volition inside of us. The thing that, the actual movement itself, when we decide to do something, that is kind of the thing that drives all movement, is the will inside of us. Very important part of existence because we identify with the doing, with the choices, with the creativity that we have. It's very important for almost all human beings, I would say. And the last one is the consciousness as a grasp aspect of experience. And here, consciousness just means awareness. It means the ability to know anything. It doesn't mean kind of consciousness in a more developed sense, but just the very ability to be aware of anything is what consciousness really is. So these are the 5 khandhas, and they are a very important area for insight, and that's why they are found in the First Noble Truth, Sankitena Panchupadana Khandha Dukkha. In brief, the 5 grasping aggregates are suffering. So how do we contemplate this? And this is kind of, to me, a very interesting area. Very often in my monastic life, I had people come up to me and say, well, what are these 5 khandhas? And so you list them, you say, well, these are the 5. And they say, but what are they? Right? Which is kind of neat, because it means that that listing didn't mean much to them, right? It didn't really have any kind of real resonance with them. So the way to think about them is as experience itself. When you experience anything, what you are experiencing is always these 5 khandhas. So you will see them in your experience. And of course, experience is also found in meditation practice. Meditation practice is just one particular way of experiencing the world. But meditation is a very powerful way of experiencing the world if we want to understand the 5 khandhas, or the 6 senses for that matter. So it gives us the data that enables us to understand the 5 khandhas. That's why meditation is so powerful. And what I want to do now, I want to show you how, through meditation practice, you can come to understand the 5 khandhas. But before I do that, I want to just discuss very briefly the idea of impermanence. Actually, first of all, stillness, right? So the importance of stillness, we talk about all the time. Mendicants develop stillness. A mendicant who has stillness truly understands. What do they truly understand? You can probably guess. The origin and ending of form, feeling, perception, choices, which is the will and consciousness, right? So you understand the nature of these things, how they arise, how they end. And this is how you get an insight into impermanence, anicca, first of all. If things end, you start to understand their impermanence, and from that comes also the understanding of dukkha and anatta, because when something disappears, it's anatta. When it's gone, it is happy. You understand suffering here. So, but to get a grasp on these 3 characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and non-self, it is useful to, first of all, understand a little bit more about what we mean by impermanence, right? So, the 3 characteristics seen through the characteristics of impermanence. Now, this is a quote from the Anapanasati Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 118. And at the very end of that sutta, in what you call the 4th tetrad of Anapanasati, it talks about insight. This is at the end of a long kind of practice of watching the breath, comes the insight experience. And the first part of that insight is observing impermanence, anicca nupassi. Anupassi means to see along with, or something like that. So you are observing, or you are seeing impermanence, anicca. And in this case, impermanence just means the kind of changeability of something. Things are moving, things are changing. Maybe they're even ceasing for a short period of time, right? Gone, then they come back again. But it's not a profound cessation, it's a superficial cessation of things. Mostly a movement. It's like the ocean moving, but the ocean is still there. And then that's the basic form of impermanence. Then the next step in understanding impermanence is to observe fading away. And fading away is a particular kind of impermanence. It is impermanence with a certain direction. So if something is fading away, it means that it is gradually disappearing. That's kind of the idea of fading away. So it's impermanence with a direction, the direction of disappearing, the direction of just fading away. And this is a more powerful kind of impermanence, because it starts to show you that things may not actually exist in the way you think they exist. Not that just that they're going up and down, but actually they're starting to disappear. And of course, that fading away, the ultimate result of fading away is cessation, right? So the practice like this, breathing in and out, observing cessation. If things fade away enough, eventually they cease. And the idea of cessation is not just really that something disappears temporarily. It is something disappears for long periods of time. And this is one of the things I would maybe add to Venerable Sunyo's presentation, is that to see something as non-self, it should really disappear in a significant chunk of time, and not only disappear, but it should be inaccessible. And the reason why it should be inaccessible, because one of the qualities of non-self, one of the aspects of non-self, is that something cannot be reached. You can't control it anymore. So if you enter a state, or you enter a kind of samadhi where the senses are no longer are no longer accessible to you. That means that you cannot control them because they're outside of your access. They become like the moon, right? You would never think of the moon as yourself because you have no control over the moon. In the same way, when the senses are completely gone and you can't even experience them, it means that they become a bit like the moon. They become like something that has nothing to do with you. And obviously then, there must be non-self. And then when you start seeing the cessation of these 5 khandhas in this way, then eventually the penny drops that there is nothing of interest there. It's got nothing to do with you. You can see that it is dukkha because it is completely gone. You feel much better when it's gone. Now you can understand why they are burning, why they are problematic. Then the dispassion, or the lack of interest, or the destruction of desire happens on that basis. Because there's nothing there that is interesting anymore. And that is the last part here, the letting go of these things, the 4th aspect of impermanence, if you like. So you can see here that impermanence is quite profound, and the most interesting kind of impermanence is the cessation kind, because it gives you very, very powerful data on which to gain real insight. So let's see how this works in practice. Are you ready? So to see how this works in practice, we're going to use the famous Anapanasati Sutta. We're going to look at the first 12 steps of Anapanasati and see how this works in action. Next time you do Anapanasati, you can start to look at the practice in this way. So right knowledge of the khandhas, form as a grasp aspect of experience. So how do we experience form, and how do we experience its cessation? It's the rupa upadana khandha, through the process of mindfulness of breathing. So this process, the first step is breathing in long, diga, long, or heavily, if you like. They know I am breathing in heavily. This is how it kind of starts out. Breathing in lightly, they know I breathe lightly. So here we can start already to see some kind of very superficial impermanence. The breath is long, then it stops for a while, and then you breathe in and out. You see the stopping and going, and then over time the breath becomes a bit more light. The quality of the breath is changing. So there's impermanence here on many different levels, and this is impermanence of form, because the breath is an aspect of form. This is part of the body. So you're seeing the changeability, breath. Stopping, in, stopping, out, stopping, then becoming lighter over time. Then you experience the whole breath. Your mindfulness is expanding a bit, becoming more powerful. You see more of the breath. Again, I've taken the liberty of changing Bhante Sujata's translation a little bit. It's a good thing it's not copyrighted. I feel very fortunate. I can do exactly the changes I want. So, yay! I'm being very naughty here. So he has body there, but I didn't like body, so I put breath in there. So I hope he doesn't hear this. But what is going on here is that you are expanding your awareness. You're seeing more of the breath. You're starting to see that the breath has many qualities you may not have seen before. Seeing its kind of its movement, it's changing over time, how it kind of has a certain shape to it, and all of these kind of things. So you're seeing more of anicca and a complete picture of things. Then you're starting to see the stilling of the physical process. And this, of course, means the stilling of the breath, right? Because this is the physical process going on. So the breath is starting to calm down. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing the fading away aspect, The fading away aspect of the breath. So the gradual movement, the gradual disappearance of things. And it is not just the breath that is fading away here. Your entire world is really fading away. The body is fading away. The 5 senses are already starting to fade away when the breath is calming down in this way. Things are turning off, gradually becoming less and less. This is what we mean when we talk about seeing the impermanence of things. You can feel this very clearly within your own experience if you do this kind of meditation practice. Then you have breathing in, experiencing rapture. Now we're moving into the area of the mind already. Rapture is partly physical, partly mental, but the body again disappearing even more into the background. The breath becoming less important because now rapture is starting to take over as maybe the main object of experience. Experiencing bliss, even more happiness. Experiencing mental processes, again more of the same really, bliss and rapture. And then the stilling of the mental processes, right? Even more calming down, things disappearing even more, the breath going even more into the background, the body disappearing even more. And at this stage where we are now, the senses are starting to get very weak. And they get even weaker with the next stage, when you are experiencing the mind, because experiencing the mind is precisely about giving up the senses, not completely, but they're really, really going into the background. Senses disappearing, the breath becoming incredibly subtle, the body probably not experiencing at all anymore, or just very, very tiny bit through the breath occasionally. And then it carries on in this way, gladdening the mind. It means the mental world is becoming more strong, the physical world becoming even less. The stilling of the mind, again the mind itself calming down, again more beautiful. Mental world, the physical world receding more and more into the background until eventually, finally, you free the mind. And the freeing the mind is experience of jhanas in this particular case. Vimochayang chittang. Vimochayang is related to the word vimutti, which is the liberation. And here we're talking about the temporary liberation of the mind. The sammaya vimutta is called in the suttas. And when you come to the liberation of the mind, this is where the viraga, the gradual fading away, reaches its kind of final endpoint in cessation. Because here, what your mind is being freed from is precisely the five senses. That's one of the main things. There's also the five hindrances, but the five senses is one of the main things that are completely disappearing at this particular point. They are gone. They have reached cessation. And this is what you see through this process. And of course, when you see the cessation, that is the absolute anicca, the absolute impermanence. And the point is that when you enter a jhana state, these five senses are no longer accessible. You have lost the five senses. You have willingly gone blind, willingly gone deaf. That's why it is very useful to see them as a fire beforehand. Otherwise, you won't be willing to let them go. You have to understand the dukkha of this thing. That's what the fire simile really is about. So when you enter this, they're no longer accessible. And because they're not even accessible, that's how you can understand the anatta, the non-self nature of these things. Because if they're non-accessible, they become a bit like the moon. The moon is inaccessible, and the same thing with the five senses. And they are dukkha, they are on fire. You know that because you have stepped out of the five senses for the first time. You can see them clearly. You can understand why they are problematic for the first time. So in this way, you can see through the process of anapanasati, by the gradual elimination of the five senses, ultimately the cessation of them, you can actually gain direct insight into the three characteristics based on this thing. This is how you start to understand the five khandhas. This is the rupa khandha right here. This is how it kind of comes to the fore.
Can I make a tiny footnote?
Make a footnote.
That you've talked mainly about the form, aggregate or aspect of experience, the physical side of it, but it also goes, and you'll agree, that form also goes beyond just physical. There's also mental perceptions of form which still exist inside the jhanas, but those are so subtle. Often when the Buddha talks about form, he refers more to the body, but sometimes goes beyond the body. I just want to make that
so it's not a full understanding of form, that's what you're saying, and that's true. It is not a full understanding of form, but it is a full understanding of the five senses, and that I think is important here, So absolutely. Okay, I'm going to quickly do a few more slides, then we can have quick questions towards the end, because I think it's important to see this also through the aspect of feeling. Maybe I can leave the will out. Feeling, very similar process that you see with form, right? So as you start out, there will still be pains and problems in the body, but as your meditation calms down, you see the full breath and the calming down of the breath. Already at this point, a lot of the pains in the body will start to disappear because you're very focused on the breath at this point. The body moves into the background. then you start to experience the rapture and the bliss of the mind. It means that painful feelings recede even more into the background. Yeah. Also, some of the happinesses that you experience through the five senses as well, they obviously recede into the background as you do this. So feelings are changing. Certain feelings are gradually fading away and eventually disappearing. Yeah, so you go through the mental process, there's a stilling of the mind, the stilling of feelings, everything becoming more and more pleasant and beautiful, the body fading into the background, and it goes all the way up. I'm just going to go fast because we're running out of time, all the way up to where you free the mind. And the moment you free the mind, all the feelings related to the five senses are gone. All painful feelings are gone. Yeah? And so what you're left with is bliss. And you can start to understand the impermanent nature of feelings themselves through this particular process. Eventually, you take this process further, take it all the way to the fourth jhana. And when you come up to the fourth jhana, that is where all pleasant and painful feeling come to an end. And of course, that is one of the reasons why the fourth jhana is a very, very powerful basis for insight. Because at that point, when you know that you have gone beyond all positive and negative feelings, and that is a better state, then really all positive and negative feelings lose their meaning for you because you found something higher here. Yeah, so you can see how, again, it's a similar kind of thing. Sorry for going so fast, but we're running out of time. Just the very last one is the will, because the will is another very important aspect to gain insight into her. And it's very obvious how this happens through Anapanasati. Because what we have seen here is how things are always calming down, always kind of reducing, the movement of the mind is calming down, craving is given up, desire is giving up, the will is being stilled. So we have the fourth one, the stilling of the physical process, which is the breath. Well, that is obviously already a reduction of the will right there. Then we have the stilling of the mental processes, and of course all the steps in between as well are a gradual stilling of everything. Things are becoming more and more calm, and essentially what that means is that the will is gradually fading away. First of all, it's impermanent, then it's fading away, and then we carry on all the way till freeing the mind. And when you free the mind in the jhanas, especially the second jhana, that is where you give up all will. You're no longer able to steer your life or to make decisions in your life because the mind is like it's frozen in a particular state. And of course, this is incredibly powerful when you see that the will itself is given up. And when the will is given up, you feel the experience is far preferable to any experience you had before. You know that the will itself is a problem. The will itself is a kind of pain. And this very thing that was so dear to you, precisely because it made you into the creative person you are, all the doings in the world, this thing that was so close to us and so important to us is suddenly seen as a problem instead. And that is a massive eye-opener. It's kind of a game changer, to use that expression. And it changes our understanding of the nature of who we are and the reality around us. Anyway, this is just a very quick, unfortunately, a little bit too fast. I would have liked to have gone through this in much more detail, but that's it. So let's just do some very last questions if we have a few minutes left. I haven't gone through consciousness because I just did the three of the five khandhas. Yeah. Ooh. Another day. Yeah.
When we were talking about the senses being on fire, it did occur to me that possibly what it means is that they are unstable. And when you say something's on fire, you mean its days are numbered because it's going to burn out and it won't be there. We depend on them. And we're depending on something that isn't stable. Is that what it means?
That's definitely also an implication you can draw from that. But the main point of that sutta is that it it burns in the sense of that it's painful, not just that it's impermanent. Like when a fire, you don't want to touch it because it's hot. That's the main message I get from it anyway. Yeah.
Ajahn, that you mentioned about the mind being with the six senses, it just came to my mind that that it is unstable. Buddha gives a very nice example in that Asutava Puttajana Sutta, Makkato, the monkey, jumping from one. I think if I remember right, it gets hold of the mind arises as one thing and then ceases as another thing.
Yeah.
That's in that sutta. So also that gets hold of one branch and then lets it go even before holding on to another one.
Yeah.
So that's how fast the mind is. Just the thought that came to my mind, and then that how fast the mind is arising and ceasing.
Yeah, so exactly. That sutta is just about the eternal movement of the mind from one sense to another one, or one sense object to another one, and always kind of moving around, never really being still. Yeah.
And also that I think what Prem asked about that. Prem asked about the desire. I think it is one of the 37 factors, isn't it, Ajahn? That
Chanda Samadhi.
Chanda Samadhi for Iddhipada.
Yeah,
first
exactly.
one. So it's part of the.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just quickly, Ajahn, when you think of consciousness as a grasped aspect of experience, what's that referring to? What's the grasped bit? I mean, like, is it talking about Namarupa, or is it talking about craving leading to another rebirth? What's in relation to consciousness? What's the grasping bit?
The grasping bit is just the fact that you're attached to it, that you want to be aware. Yeah, if someone says, if I'm going to put out your awareness, you say no thanks. It's just holding on to it.
If you're in relation to a sequence like what you've just gone through here, and then you get to the end of that sequence.
So one way of looking at it is that for example, there's 6 classes of consciousness, and so you have which they relate to each of the 6 senses. And so when you enter a state of samadhi, you are kind of given up 5 of those 6 classes of consciousness, right? So you can see 5 classes gone disappearing completely. So that would be the cessation of consciousness. And then when it comes to the actual mind, well, one of the things that you see as you go through the jhanas, you see parts of consciousness being cut off. This is kind of one of the ideas Ajahn Brahm uses. So parts of consciousness being kind of eliminated. So you start to get the feeling also that the mind itself, even that consciousness, is unstable and unreliable. And in one of the ways of then kind of contemplating the very last aspect of mind consciousness is something that we saw in one of the suttas last time, is the idea of contemplating it as created and created by volition. Remember that one? This is the Majjhima Nikaya 52, I think, or something like that. And it talks about the mind, even those jhanas, being created by volition. And then you kind of understand that these are created. Even this awareness is created and volitionally caused, and for that reason it must also be impermanent and subject to cessation eventually.
Thank you very much.
I was just wondering about the grasping as well. When you look at the 5 khandhas, the self-view is so strong because you experience pleasant and unpleasant things through your senses, and you take them to be you. I went here and saw this and ate this food, and and I'm studied this and I've done this. So there's this view of yourself, and it's very hard with each of the khandhas. You can see it with the first one a lot more with your body and who you are, because from the time you're born, you're female, you're Sri Lankan, for me anyway, and so you're classified, so you carry that sense of self around. And then everything you experience, I can see the word experience, you take to be self. So then the undoing of that as a layperson, let's say, certainly in meditation, you can do some of that. As a layperson, do you then try to discount that throughout your life when you're leading your life? Is that healthy, or is that, or is there any practice that you can do, like dana, sila? Obviously, those things help.
Yeah. Madam Sunyo, you want to say something? Or? Yeah.
Yeah, there is a practice you can do, the eightfold path.
Exactly.
And, it's not all about dana and sila, it's also about meditation. And that's why Ajahn just pointed out this process of meditation. The sense of self cannot really cease in any meaningful way just by giving and by being a good person. You become, in a way, more selfless, but you don't become really selfless in the ultimate sense of the word, like without any sense of self. That is, then you have to also add the other factors of the eightfold path: right effort, right mindfulness, right stillness, and the insights that spring from that as well. Yeah,
that's the only way.
I think many of these problems, when you try to think about how can I overcome this sense of self, it seems like insoluble when you think about it. But this is, I think, actually a very good point that Venerable Synodus made. Actually, all you have to do is practice the Noble Eightfold Path, and it just happens. It happens by itself. This self starts to dissolve, and it starts to dissolve by practicing sila, for example, because sila already restrains the self in certain ways. The deeper the sila, actually the less sense of self you will have, because that's a natural consequence of it. So it just gradually starts to dissolve, and the deeper you go on the path, the less sense of self you will have as a consequence, until eventually you get that full insight that we're looking at now, the sammanyana, where it kind of goes completely. So sometimes we try to conceptualize this but we miss the point. Actually, all we have to do is just go on the path and do it, and it just happens.
Yeah, just like in a car, you start driving, you don't go from still right away to 100 kilometers an hour. It's like you gradually increase the speed. The same on the eightfold path, you gradually increase your practice to a deeper level, and your sense of self starts decreasing. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Ajahn Brahmali, Ajahn Sunyo. Thanks so much for today's workshop. I learned so very, very, very much, really. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah. So what I just want to ask is we talk about...
Oh, we thought that was it?
Just one thing, and okay, we talk about suffering here, a lot of suffering, and then from here, you mentioned about suffering is pain and unsatisfactoriness, I had a thinking, for my analysis of suffering, I don't know whether it's right, I ask you, I see suffering as disturbing feeling or disturbing emotion and our stress in us, That is that real suffering, It's easily understood that way. Then you say, oh, suffering or pain or unsatisfactoriness, That's to do with is the disturbing emotions, that's the suffering, or the stress. That is that suffering, isn't it? I ask you.
Right, well, suffering exists on many levels, but if you want to learn how to suffer less, then in a couple minutes we will have meditation, and then we will actually bring this into practice. But also we talk a lot about the suffering aspect today because we're talking about right knowledge, but there is also another important aspect to these workshops, which is right liberation. And liberation is when move beyond suffering. So there's not just suffering, there's also an escape from suffering. So that's always something you should keep in mind as well. Then it suddenly becomes more uplifting. Yeah, life is suffering, sounds very depressing, but there is an escape from suffering. Ah, excellent. And that is what we'll talk about in the coming weeks.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming. And next... Sorry. Just to let you know that next week also Bhante Sujata will join us. There were 3 people here, Lehar. Can you get 3 people behind this table? You can. Okay, excellent. Lehar can do anything. You just have to kind of get her going. And so let's just finish off today by paying respect to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha.